The grand palace of the Stellar Empire stretched across 3 mountains, its crystal towers reaching toward the stars. Inside the throne room, Princess Alara sat perfectly still on her family's ancient seat. Her silver eyes watched the crowd below without showing any emotion. Today would change her life forever. According to the laws written 10,000 years ago, she must choose a consort. But not just anyone. Her chosen one must pass 3 sacred tests that revealed the truth of a person's character. The tests had been used by her ancestors for generations, and no one could question their wisdom. The great doors opened with a sound like thunder. Prince Victor entered first. He was tall and covered in medals from 100 battles. His people, the warriors of the Crimson Dominion, controlled 50 star systems through military might. Victor walked with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. His red cape flowed behind him like a river of blood. "Princess Alara," Victor said, bowing just enough to be polite but not enough to seem weak. "I offer you my strength and my armies." Behind him came Lord Adrian, dressed in robes made from fabric that cost more than most planets. He ruled the trading guilds, controlling the flow of wealth across the galaxy. Servants carried chests of treasure behind him, jewels that sparkled like captured stars, rare metals, and ancient artifacts. Adrian smiled like a man who believed everything had a price. "I offer you prosperity beyond measure," Adrian said smoothly. The third suitor was Duke Philip, accompanied by a dozen advisors carrying data tablets and holographic displays. He came from the scholar worlds where knowledge was power. Philip's people had mapped every known star, calculated every scientific formula, and archived every piece of information in the galaxy. "I offer you wisdom and understanding," Philip said, adjusting his glasses. Princess Alara looked at each of them without speaking. They were exactly what she expected. Powerful men seeking more power through marriage. She had met dozens like them over the past months. "The testing will begin tomorrow at dawn," she announced. Her voice echoed through the massive hall. "Prepare yourselves." The suitors bowed and left to their luxurious guest chambers. The throne room slowly emptied as nobles and servants departed. The great celebration would continue in the banquet halls, but Alara remained seated, alone with her thoughts. Far below the throne room, in the mechanical levels where most people never went, Thomas Gray wiped sweat from his forehead. The environmental control panel blinked with warning lights again. The palace was so old that something always needed fixing. "Come on, you stubborn thing," Thomas muttered, reaching deep into the panel with his wrench. His uniform was stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. He had been working for 6 hours straight, but the job needed to be done right. Thomas was human, from a small planet called Earth in a quiet corner of the galaxy. His people had only figured out faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. They were the newcomers, the kids at the adults' table. Most aliens thought humans were amusing but not particularly important. Thomas didn't mind. He liked his job. While princes and nobles played their political games upstairs, he kept the air flowing and the water clean. Someone had to do it. Besides, the pay was good, and he was saving money to bring his younger sister to the station for her education. "There we go," he said as the panel finally accepted his repairs. The warning lights turned green. He smiled at the machine like it was an old friend. "I knew you could do it." Thomas packed up his tools and checked his schedule. The palace would be crazy tomorrow with the testing ceremony. That meant more systems running at full capacity, more chances for things to break down. He would need to start early. As he walked through the quiet corridors, he passed a window that looked out over the palace gardens. In the distance, he could see the lights of the guest towers where the suitors were staying. He wondered briefly what it would be like to be one of them, powerful, important, with everyone watching your every move. Then he shook his head and laughed at himself. "Get real, Thomas," he said aloud. "You're a janitor. Those guys live in a different universe." He continued down the corridor toward the workers' quarters, humming an old song from Earth. Tomorrow the princes would try to prove they were worthy of a princess. Thomas would just try to keep the toilets working. Both jobs needed doing. In her private chambers high above, Princess Alara stood at her window, looking down at the same gardens. She felt tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Tomorrow she would watch powerful men compete for her hand. She would judge them according to the ancient tests. But a small voice in her mind whispered a question she could not ignore. What if none of them passed? What if the kind of person she needed did not exist among the powerful and ambitious? She pushed the thought away and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. Dawn broke over the palace, painting the crystal towers gold and pink. The testing chamber filled with nobles and dignitaries from across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to witness the ancient trials that would choose the next prince consort. Princess Elara entered wearing ceremonial robes that shimmered like starlight. She took her place on the platform while the first test was prepared. In the center of the chamber stood a massive mirror, taller than 3 men. Its surface moved like liquid silver. "The Mirror of Truth," announced the High Priestess, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "It shows what lies in the deepest part of your soul. Step forward, Prince Victor." The warrior prince approached confidently. He had fought dragons on ice planets and led armies against impossible odds. A simple mirror held no fear for him. He stood before it and lowered his mental shields as required. The mirror rippled. Victor's reflection changed, showing not the man who stood there but something deeper. In the mirror, he saw himself seated on a throne of skulls, wearing a crown of conquered worlds. Victory after victory, battle after battle, his own glory reflected in endless wars. He saw no faces of the people he ruled, only his own legend growing larger. Princess Elara stood. "You see only yourself," she said quietly. "You fail." Victor's face turned red with anger, but the ancient laws could not be challenged. Guards escorted him out. Lord Adrian stepped forward next, smiling as if he already knew he would succeed. The second test appeared, a small garden platform rising from the floor. On it sat a single plant with dying leaves, its stem bent and weak. The Eternus flower, known across the galaxy for responding only to genuine care. "The Garden of Patience," the High Priestess announced. "Bring life back to what is dying." Adrian immediately pulled out his scanner. He analyzed the soil composition, temperature, and light levels. Then he signaled his servants, who brought expensive fertilizers and climate control devices. He purchased rare nutrients and applied them generously. He adjusted everything his technology told him to adjust. The plant drooped further. Its last healthy leaf turned brown and fell. "You see only outcomes, not the journey," Princess Elara said. "You fail." Adrian protested, arguing that his methods were scientifically sound, but the plant had given its judgment. He left with his servants trailing behind. Duke Philip approached the third test with careful steps. Before him appeared a massive maze with walls of light. The Compassion Gate. Inside, holographic figures acted out scenes of suffering. Wounded soldiers calling for help, hungry children begging for food, elderly people who had fallen and could not stand. Philip pulled out his scanner immediately. It identified each hologram, showing him which were real and which were projections. He calculated the most efficient path through the maze, the one that would get him to the end fastest. When a holographic child reached for him crying, he stepped around her without pausing. His scanner had already told him she was not real. He reached the end in record time, looking pleased with himself. "You see only logic, not hearts," Princess Elara said, her voice sad now. "You fail." One by one, 17 suitors took the test. Warrior princes and merchant lords, scholars and diplomats. Each failed in their own way. Some saw only power, others saw only profit, and still others saw only puzzles to solve. None saw what the test truly measured. That evening, Princess Elara sat with her mother, Queen Helena, in the royal gardens. The older woman's face was kind but concerned. "Perhaps my standards are impossible," Elara whispered. "No, my daughter," Helena said gently. "The tests are not about standards. Your consort must see others, not opportunities. That person exists. You must trust." Later that night, a grand gala filled the throne room with music and laughter. Nobles tried to forget the failed tests. Above the celebration, hidden in the rafters and maintenance spaces, Thomas worked quickly. The air circulation system had picked the worst time to malfunction. He could hear the party below while he adjusted valves and replaced filters. "Almost got it," he muttered, reaching for a stubborn bolt. As he worked, he heard voices below. Princess Elara was speaking with an advisor near the balcony. "Perhaps there is no one suitable in all the galaxy," Elara said sadly. Thomas said nothing. It was not his place to comment on royal matters. He focused on his repairs. An hour later, walking through a service corridor with his toolkit, Thomas heard crying. A small Stellari girl sat against the wall, tears streaming down her blue-tinted face. She wore a fancy dress that marked her as a noble's child. Thomas did not pull out a scanner. He did not check if she was a hologram or some kind of test. He simply knelt down to her level. "Hey there," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Emilia," she sobbed. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Thomas. You look lost. How about I help you find your parents?" He offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. As they walked, Thomas told her silly stories about his niece back on Earth, how she once tried to teach their dog to read, how she insisted vegetables were just trees that grew underground. Amelia giggled through her tears. From a balcony high above, Princess Alara watched the human janitor and the lost child. She had been following to make sure Amelia was safe. But now she stood frozen, observing something remarkable. The human had not scanned, had not calculated. He simply helped. That night, alone in her chambers, Alara accessed the Galactic database and searched for information about humans. She read for hours. One phrase appeared repeatedly in psychological studies: humans demonstrate altruistic behavior even when it provides no evolutionary advantage. They help strangers at personal cost. This trait appears instinctive rather than learned. Princess Alara leaned back in her chair as a dangerous, unprecedented idea formed in her mind. Her heart beat faster. It was radical. It would shock the entire empire. But it might be exactly right. 3 days passed after the failed tests. The palace buzzed with gossip and speculation. More suitors were arriving, each convinced they would succeed where others had failed. Princess Alara felt exhaustion settling into her bones. The royal council decided to hold a grand gala to lift spirits. The throne room was transformed with floating lights and exotic flowers from a dozen worlds. Musicians played instruments that created sounds no human ear had ever heard. Nobles danced in elaborate patterns that looked like living geometry. High above the celebration, in the dark spaces between the decorated ceiling and the actual roof, Thomas crawled through narrow maintenance tunnels. His portable scanner beeped urgently. The air circulation system was failing again, and with 800 guests below, the throne room would become uncomfortably hot within an hour. "Why do you always break during parties?" Thomas asked the machinery as if it could answer. He opened a panel and winced. A coolant line had cracked, probably from the extra strain. He would need to replace an entire section. He worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Below he could hear music and laughter. Sometimes voices drifted up through the ventilation grates. Once he heard Princess Alara herself speaking to someone. "The tests continue tomorrow," she said, her voice tired. "I wonder if I am searching for someone who does not exist." Thomas paused his work for a moment, feeling unexpected sympathy for the princess. He had seen her a few times from a distance. She always looked lonely even surrounded by people. He shook his head and returned to his repairs. Royal problems were not his concern. His concern was fixing this coolant line before people started fainting from heat. 40 minutes later, he closed the panel with satisfaction. The system hummed smoothly again. Thomas packed his tools and made his way toward the service stairs, taking a route that avoided the main corridors. Workers were supposed to stay invisible during royal events. He was passing through a narrow hallway when he heard crying. Thomas stopped and looked around. The sound came from around a corner. He found a small girl sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She wore an expensive dress made of fabric that changed colors slowly. Her skin had the slight blue tint that marked her as Stellari, one of the princess's own people. The girl could not have been more than 6 years old. Tears ran down her face and she was hiccuping from crying so hard. Thomas knelt down slowly, setting his heavy toolkit aside. "Hey there," he said softly. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. She did not speak. "My name is Thomas," he continued in a gentle voice. "What's yours?" "Amelia," she whispered. "That's a lovely name. Amelia, can you tell me what's wrong?" "I can't find my mama," she sobbed. "There were so many people and I got lost and I don't know where I am." Thomas felt his heart squeeze. He thought of his own niece back on Earth, how scared she would be in this situation. He offered his hand without thinking twice. "Would you like me to help you find your mama?" Amelia hesitated only a second before taking his hand. Her small fingers gripped his tightly. As they walked through the corridors toward the throne room, Thomas talked to distract her from her fear. "You know what? My niece back on Earth, she's about your age. Her name is Sophie. One time, she decided to paint our dog purple because she said he looked too boring." Amelia sniffled. "Purple?" "Completely purple. Used her mother's fancy makeup. Took 3 baths to get it all off the poor dog." Thomas made his voice dramatic. "He looked like a giant grape with legs." Amelia giggled a little. "And another time," Thomas continued, "Sophie tried to teach that same dog how to read. She sat him down with a picture book and got very serious. She said, 'Mr. Whiskers, this is important. You need an education.'" "Did the dog learn?" Amelia asked, her tears slowing. "Not a single word. But he was a very good listener." They reached the main corridor leading to the throne room. Thomas could see guards ahead and the glow of the party beyond. I bet your mama is very worried about you. Let's get you back to her, okay? What Thomas did not know was that Princess Alara had noticed Amelia was missing. She had quietly excused herself from the party to search, worried about the daughter of one of her advisors. She stood now on a balcony overlooking the corridor, watching everything. She watched the human janitor kneel beside a crying child. She watched him offer his hand without hesitation. She watched him make the girl laugh while walking her to safety. At no point did he pull out a scanner to check if the child was real or perhaps a test. At no point did he calculate what advantage he might gain from helping. At no point did he walk away because it was not his problem. He simply saw someone who needed help and he helped. Princess Alara felt something shift in her understanding. She had been testing princes and nobles, people raised to see every action as strategy. But this human, this maintenance worker, acted from a different place entirely. That night, after the gala ended and Amelia was safely reunited with her grateful mother, Princess Alara sat in her private study. She accessed the Galactic Information Network and began researching humans. The files were fascinating. Humans were persistence hunters who chased prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They built civilizations without natural armor or weapons. They survived ice ages and plagues. They were remarkably stubborn and adaptable. But one thing appeared in report after report, study after study: humans helped each other even when it made no logical sense. They jumped into rivers to save strangers. They shared food during famines. They protected the weak at cost to themselves. Scientists called it irrational altruism. It seemed to be wired into their basic nature. Princess Alara read until dawn began to brighten her windows. Her mind worked through a possibility that was both thrilling and terrifying. It went against every tradition. It would shock the noble families. It might even cause a scandal. But the test did not lie. And she had just witnessed something her tests were designed to measure. She stood and walked to her window, looking down at the palace grounds as they came to life with morning activity. Somewhere down there, a human janitor was probably starting his day, unaware that a princess was thinking about him. Princess Alara made her decision. Tomorrow she would do something unprecedented. Tomorrow she would trust what she had seen. Tomorrow everything would change. Princess Alara barely slept. At dawn, she dressed in simple robes and walked through the palace gardens alone. Her guards followed at a respectful distance, used to her morning walks. The gardens were peaceful at this hour, with dew still fresh on the leaves and the first birds beginning their songs. She needed to clear her mind before the day's testing began. 3 more suitors would attempt the trials today. All were powerful men from important families. All would probably fail like the others. As she walked past the central fountain, she heard a voice. Someone was talking, but she saw no one else nearby. Curious, she moved closer and found the source. Thomas sat beside the fountain's maintenance panel, tools spread around him. He had one hand deep inside the mechanism, adjusting something. And he was talking to the fountain itself. I know, Thomas said to the stone structure. I'm sorry this took so long, old friend. You like to run smoothly, don't you? All that water flowing just right, making that nice sound. I bet it feels wrong when you're not working properly. He adjusted something and water began flowing again, smooth and clear. Thomas smiled with genuine pleasure. There we go. That's better, isn't it? You're doing great. Princess Alara stood frozen, watching. The human was apologizing to a fountain, treating an inanimate object with kindness and respect, as if it had feelings that could be hurt. He showed consideration for something that could never thank him or reward him. In that moment, something clicked into place in her mind. She finally understood what her tests truly measured. Not power. Not intelligence. Not even wisdom or strategic thinking. Unconditional kindness. Her people, the Stellari, had evolved over 10,000 years into beings of pure logic and efficiency. They had optimized themselves, removing emotions they considered wasteful. They learned to practice compassion intellectually, applying it where it was strategically useful. They were better, smarter, more advanced than almost everyone in the galaxy. But they had lost something. Something humans still carried in their bones and blood. The impulse to be kind without reason. To care without calculating the cost. To see a lost child and help, to see a broken fountain and apologize to it. Humans were not more advanced. They were not stronger or smarter. But they had kept something precious that her people had optimized away. Princess Alara took a deep breath. Her decision was made. It would cause chaos. The noble families would be outraged. The council would object. But the test did not lie, and she had seen what she needed to see. She walked toward Thomas. Her guards immediately tensed, hands moving to their weapons. This broke every protocol. A princess did not approach a common worker without proper ceremony and announcement. Thomas looked up at the sound of footsteps. His eyes went wide when he saw who approached. He scrambled to his feet, nearly dropping his wrench. "Your Highness. I'm sorry, I was just, the fountain needed, I didn't know you walked here." Princess Alara raised her hand and Thomas fell silent. She stood before him, this human in a stained work uniform, grease under his fingernails, confusion written all over his face. Behind her, she heard her guards whispering urgently into their communication devices. She ignored them. She spoke the ritual words, the ancient phrase used for 10,000 years when a princess chose her candidate. Her voice rang clear in the morning air. "The one who would stand beside me must pass where others failed. The one who sees not with eyes but with heart. The one who gives without counting cost. The one who—" She paused, looking directly into Thomas's bewildered eyes, "who treats even a fountain with kindness." Thomas stood there holding his wrench, completely lost. "Your Highness, I don't understand." Princess Alara felt her own heart beating fast. She had never been so certain and so terrified at the same time. She spoke one word, but she spoke it with absolute authority. "You." For 3 full seconds nothing happened. Thomas blinked. The guards stared. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Then chaos erupted. The guards shouted into their devices. Within seconds, royal advisors came running from the palace. Lady Catherine, the head of the royal council, appeared so quickly she must have been nearby. Her face showed absolute shock. "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Catherine demanded, forgetting protocol in her surprise. "I am choosing my candidate for the tests," Princess Alara said calmly. "But he's a maintenance worker. A human. This is impossible." Other nobles began arriving, drawn by the commotion. They gathered around, staring at Thomas like he was some strange creature that had wandered into their world. Thomas himself looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He still held his wrench. "Your Highness," Thomas managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. "I think there's been a mistake. I fix things. I'm nobody important." "The law is clear," Princess Alara announced, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I may choose any sentient being to face the 3 tests. I choose Thomas Gray of Earth." "This is outrageous," shouted Lord Marcus, one of the council members. "The testing is for princes and nobles, not janitors." "The law says sentient being," Princess Alara repeated firmly. "It does not specify rank or species. Or do you suggest our ancestors wrote their laws poorly?" That silenced Lord Marcus. No one would dare insult the ancient laws. Lady Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Alara, please think about this. If he fails the tests, it will be humiliating. And if he somehow passes, the noble families will never accept a human commoner as prince consort. Then perhaps," Princess Alara said quietly, "it is time they learned to see differently." She turned back to Thomas, who looked like he might faint. "Thomas Gray, will you face the 3 tests?" Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked at the crowd of angry nobles, at the stern guards, at the princess standing before him. He was still holding his wrench like it was the only real thing in a world gone mad. He swallowed hard. "Your Highness, I don't know the first thing about being a prince." "That is not what I asked," Princess Alara said gently. "Will you face the tests?" Thomas looked down at his wrench. Then at the fountain he had just repaired. Then back at the princess. Something in her eyes steadied him. She was not mocking him. She was serious. She truly wanted him to try. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, Your Highness. I'll try." The palace exploded with argument and protest. But Princess Alara stood calm at the center of the storm, watching the human janitor who had apologized to a fountain. She had made her choice. Now they would see if she was right. Within an hour, the testing chamber filled with people. Nobles crowded every available space, whispering angrily among themselves. This was unprecedented. Scandalous. A human maintenance worker taking the sacred tests meant for princes and lords. Many demanded the princess change her mind. Others threatened to leave the empire entirely. But Stellari law was absolute. Once a princess spoke the ritual words and a candidate accepted, nothing could stop the testing. Not tradition. Not protests. Not even the royal council. Thomas stood at the entrance to the chamber, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. He had changed into clean clothes, but he still felt completely out of place. Lady Catherine stood beside him, her face disapproving. You will embarrass yourself and insult the princess, she said coldly. Withdraw now and save everyone the trouble. Thomas looked at her, then at the crowd beyond. Part of him wanted to run. But he remembered Princess Alara's eyes in the garden. She had been serious. She believed he could do this. He did not understand why, but he would try. I gave my word, Thomas said quietly. I'll see it through. The high priestess called for silence. Thomas walked into the chamber on shaking legs. Princess Alara sat on her platform, calm and composed. She nodded to him once, encouraging. The mirror of truth appeared first, its liquid silver surface swirling. Thomas approached it with his heart in his throat. He had seen Prince Victor face this mirror. The warrior had been confident. Thomas felt anything but confident. Lower your mental defenses, the high priestess instructed. Let the mirror see your truth. Thomas did not have fancy mental shields like the Stellari. He was just human. He stood before the mirror and looked. His reflection changed. He saw himself working late nights in the palace, eating alone in the cafeteria. He saw his loneliness so far from Earth and his family. He saw his doubts. Was he good enough? Would he ever achieve anything important? He saw his fear that humans would always be seen as the primitive newcomers. But he also saw other things. He saw determination in his eyes, the stubborn refusal to give up that his grandmother had taught him. He saw hope that humanity would find its place among the stars. He saw himself helping Amelia last night, and the simple joy it brought him. He saw his dreams of bringing his sister to the station, of making a difference however he could. The mirror showed someone who doubted himself, but who kept trying anyway. Princess Alara stood. You see yourself truly, both weakness and strength. Pass. Thomas exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. 1 test down. 2 to go. The Garden of Patience rose from the floor. The dying Eternus plant looked even worse than when Lord Adrian had tried. Its leaves were brown and curled. Thomas approached it carefully and sat down beside it. He pulled out his datapad and began researching everything he could find about Eternus plants. He tried adjusting the temperature. Nothing happened. He tried different mineral combinations in the water. The plant drooped further. He spent an hour trying different approaches from the scientific database. Each failed. Thomas sat back, frustrated. He was going to fail. He was going to embarrass the princess who had believed in him. He looked at the dying plant and felt sadness for it. Then he remembered something. His grandmother's garden back on Earth. She used to say that plants were like people. They responded to care and attention, not just correct formulas. She would talk to her tomatoes, adjust things by feel, try approaches that made no scientific sense but somehow worked. Thomas took a breath. He stopped looking at his datapad and really looked at the plant. He touched the soil gently. Too dry but also too compact. He loosened it carefully with his fingers, talking softly. I know you're struggling. Let's try something different, okay? He adjusted the pH levels based on intuition rather than data, remembering how his grandmother had mixed different soils. He gave the plant water but not too much. He moved the light source slightly. Then he just sat with it, his hand on the pot, willing it to live. Slowly, so slowly he almost missed it, a leaf began to straighten. Color returned to the edges. A tiny bud appeared on the stem. Pass, Princess Alara said, and her voice held warmth now. Thomas felt tears in his eyes. 2 down. The compassion gate appeared, the massive maze of light. Thomas entered it without hesitation this time. He knew what he had to do. The first hologram was a wounded soldier lying on the ground. Thomas knelt beside him, tore fabric from his own shirt, and bandaged the man's arm. You're going to be okay, he said gently. The second was an elderly woman who had fallen. Thomas helped her stand, made sure she was stable, and walked her a few steps. The third was a hungry child. Thomas had no food, but he sat with her and told her stories to distract her from hunger. Lady Catherine's voice echoed through the maze. You are taking too long. The test has a time limit. Thomas stopped and looked up at where the voice came from. Some things shouldn't be rushed, he called back. Then he continued helping each person he found. When he finally reached the end, the entire chamber was silent. Thomas stood there, his shirt torn, exhausted, but feeling strangely peaceful. Princess Alara descended from her platform. Pass, she said simply. The chamber erupted. Some nobles shouted in anger. Others stood in stunned silence. A very few began to clap. That evening, Princess Alara brought Thomas to her private chambers. Her mother, Queen Helena, was there, smiling kindly. The older woman nodded to Thomas and quietly left them alone. I don't understand, Thomas said, still overwhelmed. Why me? Princess Alara gestured for him to sit. I chose you because of your humanity, Thomas. Not despite it, because of it. My people spent 10,000 years becoming smarter, more efficient, more logical. We optimized ourselves into perfection. But we lost something in the process. We lost the impulse to care without reason. To help without calculating benefit. To apologize to fountains and rescue lost children without thinking twice. She moved to the window, looking out at the stars. Humans are not the most advanced species. You are not the strongest or the smartest. But you kept something we lost. You carry compassion as naturally as breathing. And we need that. I need that. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile. My grandmother used to tell me something. She'd say, Thomas, it's not where you start in life. It's what you do with what you're given. Princess Alara turned to him, her silver eyes catching the light. What will you do with what you've been given today? Thomas thought about it. About being chosen by a princess. About passing tests meant for the most powerful beings in the galaxy. About representing his entire species in a place that had considered humans primitive. I guess I'll try my best, he said. Same as always. Help where I can. Be kind where possible. Maybe learn how to be a prince along the way. He laughed nervously. Though I still think you're crazy for choosing me. Princess Alara crossed the room and took his hand. Her touch was warm. That's all I ask. Just be yourself. The janitor became a prince that day. The news spread across the galaxy. A human maintenance worker had passed the sacred tests of the Stellar Empire. Some species laughed. Others were offended. Many were simply shocked. But Thomas remained himself. He still woke early. He still helped people who needed it. He still apologized to machines when repairs took too long. And slowly, very slowly, the Stellari began to learn from him. Princess Alara's choice taught her people something they had forgotten. That advancement was not just about technology and logic. That strength came in many forms. That sometimes the most important quality was not the ability to conquer or calculate, but simply the courage to care. The empire would never be quite the same. And humanity had found its first true friend among the ancient powers of the galaxy. All because a janitor helped a lost child without thinking twice.